Howdy. We also have Kelly Drake with us from Faculty Affairs, so I want to make sure that she gets acknowledged because we are glad to have her with us today. So yes, we are presenting on Huron. It is a system that everyone at TAMU needs to know how to use. It can be overwhelming because we only use it once a year most of the time, and you forget from one year to the next. So we want to make sure that we make it as easy as possible on you to meet this requirement. So again, Mark Bell is from Human Resources. Kelly Drake is from Faculty Affairs, and we'll get into how they and their offices play into the system in combination with our office, which is the Research Security and Export Controls Office. So it may seem at first like you have nothing to do with research security or export controls, but you do. And so our office generally handles things that are related to international activities, collaborations, high risk global engagements, any of those types of things, shipping, travel, that those are reviewed through our office. But then our smaller group that's listed here, we look at things that have to do with conflicts of interest and also compliance with and understanding of several rules and regulations that I will address on the screen later. If you should get an email from any of the people that are listed there, please be sure that you respond because it's important. And we have a personal goal of trying to get our compliance rate as high as possible. And McKaylee's personal goal is 100%. So if you could get on and help your friends get this completed as well, we would really appreciate it. Okay. So we have tried to come up with a little tool to help you understand what Huron is for. And so it just organizes what we disclose yearly. So you do have to disclose things and you do have to do it yearly. That is required of all employees. And it is really just a simple system that has forms within it and it helps us keep it all in one place. And so we are going to today talk to you about why you have to disclose. We're going to explain some of the features and functions of Huron and show you how exactly to do all of the things that you might need to do in Huron, and then we'll answer questions if there's time at the end. We are also happy to answer questions at any time at that coi@tamu.edu email that was on the previous screen. Okay, so why do we have to do this? I could go on and on and on about all the reasons why we have to do it, and most of it comes from outside of our office. The federal sponsors who are sending money to universities for research, they have requirements that we have to meet. There are several big ticket items, the CHIPS and Science Act, NSPM 33. Those came down also from the federal government that had different requirements that we need to comply with. And then in response to that, Texas issued some other legislation, and there's some more that aren't even listed on here. This is not an exhaustive list. Of all the things that we are responsible for. And then we have to report that to other agencies that we're doing it. And so the way that we are using Huron, one of the ways that we're using Huron is to help certify that information. So at the system level and then at the university level, there are more rules that have come down in response to these higher level things. And so you will see that through Huron, we are dealing with System Regulation 150302, which is related to financial conflicts of interest in sponsored research. And if you're somebody who's a staff member who has nothing to do with research, you might think Huron doesn't have anything to do with you. But then you might see that 310502, external employment that's related to staff members, does apply. So that's one of the things that you need to keep in mind is that this is a very broad system. We're gathering lots of information and, we say all employees and then it never fails. We get an email from somebody that says, I don't really think this applies to me. It does. And so these are all of the ways and all of the regulations that Huron is being used right here on this screen. So we can help answer questions about any of those things as well. Okay, so again, Huron is simply a disclosure system. We do gather information about financial conflicts of interest. That was previously done in Maestro. So if you've been an employee here for a while, you may have done that in the Maestro system. Everybody by now should know that it's switched over to Huron, but there still may be some people that have some confusion about that. Conflicts of commitment disclosure. So talking about how you're using your time That's gathered here in this system. And then faculty consulting and external employment, those things are also addressed through this system. Huron was designed so that there's one place where people can go look for all of this information. It's really confusing in a big system like A&M to have lots of different computer systems and lots of different places to go disclose things. So this system was adopted with the hopes that it would make things easier on you guys, but also to help the people who have to review all of this information to just have it all housed in one place. And so it's supporting the institution in many ways, and it has helped us to also increase our levels of compliance with all these rules and regulations. So within the system, there are two main features. And the first one that I like to talk about is the pre-approval request. And the reason that we talk about it first is because it is pre, that means before. And so if you are an employee of Texas A&M University who is required to submit a pre-approval request, you need to do it before you commence with the activity that you're trying to do. And so you want to make sure that as soon as you know you're going to be involved in something, you start submitting that paperwork so that it has time to route to all the people and get approved before you start it. The pre-approval request process that's in Huron addresses activities that fall under each of these three regulations that are listed here. The difference is who they are routed to. So you won't need to determine which one of the regulations you're following. You just need to go in and seek pre-approval. And then once we see it, we will determine who all needs to see it, how many signatures are needed, that kind of thing, based on the regulation that is applying. So one of the reasons why you would need to submit a pre-approval request is if you are commencing with an activity that is considered a high-risk global engagement or a high-risk international collaboration. And I know that that is a lot of words on the page. You can go to our website later if you need more information, or you can always contact us. But if you have ongoing activities with a person who is affiliated with an entity that is located in one of these countries highlighted down at the bottom, that is considered high risk. It has to route through Huron, but it also goes outside of the Huron system to some elevated members at system, OGC. And so it's really important that you consider that this review could take a little bit longer and you get those PARs submitted early. This is the PAR type that our office is primarily responsible for, which ties it to the research security and export controls. And so that is how we touch these. There are also PARs that you would need to submit if you are commencing with an activity that is considered faculty consulting and or external professional employment. And so these would be PARs that will route to faculty affairs. And so that's how Kelly Drake is going to help us today. You can see right there, there's a list of things that are commonly submitted as 310501 PARs, but it's not an exhaustive list. And faculty affairs is really the subject matter expert on your service mission and whether or not the activity falls under that. And so that is how we work together with our office when we are dealing with 310501 PARs. And then the third type of PAR is 310502, external employment, which is related to staff members, or if a faculty member has an external activity that doesn't have anything to do with their field of expertise. So a physics and astronomy professor who teaches, piano lessons on the weekend, maybe, or something like that. And Mark Bell is going to be our expert on that, and he's going to present in a minute and talk to you a little bit more about that review process. Again, the list here is small, but the net cast is wide. There are a lot of different types of external employment, and so that is how we work with HR on these forms. So always remember, if it's outside, you're compensated, especially if you're compensated, request pre-approval is the button you're going to be looking for. And so I'm going to turn it over to Mark, and he's going to talk to you a little bit more about the review process for PARs that fall under 310502. And Kelly will be here and can answer some questions at the end about 01.
Good morning. It's my pleasure to be with you this morning. And I thank you for taking time out of what is a very busy week for all of us to learn about external employment and all of our obligations. So thank you very much. I have three slides for you today. This first one has the most words on it, and I can tell you we'll be spending the least amount of time on it, primarily because Tressie has covered a lot of this already, and plus the audience we're speaking with today knows quite a bit about rules and regs and policy and all of that stuff. So I'll cover a few highlights. But if you're sitting there wondering why in the world does Texas A&M care about my external employment, it's a fair question. I mean, if you worked at Ace Hardware during the week, they probably don't care what you do on the weekends. They probably don't even ask what you do on the weekends. And the distinction is easy to make because we can all understand Ace Hardware is a private company while Texas A&M is a public institution. But I would counter with this question. Would Ace Hardware care if you worked for them during the week and then you worked at your brother-in-law's hardware store on the weekends where everything is miraculously a dollar less than Ace Hardware? Well, they might. They probably would. And I ask that question because it leads to a larger point that I'd like to make, which is that all of these issues on this page, I think, while yes, we've inherited these burdens from the state of things that we have to track, I think you could make a reasonable argument that every company, every organization, public or private, cares about all of these things. I think they care whether their employees show up to work, that they work their 40 hours a week, that they do work while they're at work, that they do not take advantage of the company or misuse resources, and that they don't use their position to benefit them or their brother-in-law while they're at work for you. So I say that because I think that we look at these things sometimes as just kind of bureaucratic stuff that we have to do. But I would argue that also they are things that the state cares about because they are important. And as I'll talk about in a little bit, a lot of the concepts on this page are things that can trip up employees and also can be indications that there's something going on with an employee down the road. So if we can switch to the next slide. Thank you so much. Now, I've been doing this a couple of years now, and I have to tell you that it's always refreshing for me to see all the ways in which our colleagues across the system spend their spare time, either making money for their family or serving their community or starting a business. And it's all of the things that you would think we'd see. Lots of retail, lots of Uber Eats and DoorDash. And Etsy is very popular to sell your crafts and your woodworking. But it's also a lot of stuff that you might not think about. And frankly, a lot of cool things. People volunteer for CASA, volunteer for the food bank, people working with senior citizens and serving on various boards. Lots of board service with our colleagues, school boards, hospital boards, church boards, boards of companies, and all of those things we need to know about. And so for your benefit, while we say external employment, that can be a little misleading. Tressie has touched on this already, but external employment implies that it's a job for which you receive compensation. And while that's true, it's much broader than that. I think it's more accurate to say that we are interested in your external activities. And if you're not sure whether or not you should submit a PAR, my advice is always there's no downside to submit a PAR. So better to be safe than sorry. So go ahead and submit one. I think we can let you know whether that's external employment or not. But again, just to cover yourself and to make sure that everybody knows what you've got going on, submit that PAR. Outside employment shouldn't interfere with employees' assigned duties. This is primarily dealing with if you have something that requires time from the normal 40-hour per week obligation that you made to Texas A&M. And I'll talk about that more in a little bit later. Tressie's talked about the PAR, And just so you know, I work on the main campus side of HR, what a lot of people refer to as the O2 side. And so when we talk about how the process works for submitting a PAR, just know that depending on who employs you, their actions may be a little bit different. Now, regardless of who you work for, all of the agencies and all of our institutions take our guidance from system regulations. So the policy itself probably isn't going to be that much different, but just know how you go about submitting one might be a little bit different. So make sure you familiarize yourself with that. Now, this last bullet, I'll spend just a couple of minutes on because it's important. In our external employment policy, we do say that noncompliance can result in disciplinary measures, and that is sufficiently vague, which is good and bad. It's good in that if you haven't disclosed external employment or obligations, it doesn't mean that you can't be eligible for merit, and it doesn't mean that your AWL might get revoked. But it could mean those things if that's how your employer decides to use it. Now, I'll be honest, I haven't seen that happen, but I'm not sure if I would if it did happen. So, but what I would say is I would compare submitting disclosures like that box that we have on all of our performance reviews that says Mark is up to date on all of his train track trainings. Those are little things, just like disclosures are little things, but they're important things. Frankly, what we find, I work in employee relations and HR, and our office is charged with handling those problem children when they become problems for somebody out there. And what we find by and large is if an employee hasn't taken care of the small things, that can be an indication that they haven't taken care of the larger things. And so my advice to people is always, this is low hanging fruit. Take care of those small things so that you can focus on the big things. Okay. So submitting a disclosure for external employment is a two-step process. The first part is in Huron when you complete your disclosure profile. There are questions on there related to it. Do you have outside employment? How much money do you make? Various things like that. But that's just step one. The second step, as Tracy said, is submitting a PAR, a pre-approval request. Now, you can say, well, this is just bureaucratic rigmarole that they force us to go through. But I would actually argue that this is a very helpful process because it encourages people to have conversations with their supervisor and with their unit. And that creates transparency, which is always good. And it's just one of those things that makes everyone happier when your boss knows what you're doing and you are comfortable with sharing with them what you do outside. Hopefully, that's a situation that we'll always find when submitting a PAR. And I've always found it to be that case. So there are a lot of things I'm looking for. Let me back up. So when you submit a PAR, the first person to receive it is going to be your immediate supervisor. So again, hopefully you've had a conversation with him or her and you've discussed this. Now, once your supervisor signs off, then it goes to several other people. It goes to what they call a department head level supervisor. And if you're in a staff title, it would come to me in HR. If you're in a faculty title, it would go to Kelly Drake. And as Tracy said, it might go to import control if you're working with a foreign entity. But when I receive a PAR, I'm looking for several things. And the first thing I'm looking for is a well-defined scope of work. I need to be able to understand what it is you do and who you're working for. Now, if you're working for DoorDash or Uber Eats, I certainly know what those are, and that's not a problem. Or if you're a bookkeeper for your husband's business, again, not a problem. I understand what that is. And so what I would say is if it's easily understandable from your title and the company, then that's fine. But when in doubt, always err on the side of giving more information, just because you never want me to have to send it back to you and go, hey, I just need more from you. So you never want to stop the process. You know how long these things can take sometimes. And then I'll look at whatever you're doing externally and compare it to what you do for the university. And then we also ask if there's an equity ownership at stake in your external employment. It's not a good thing or a bad thing. Frankly, I think it's an awesome thing that you're starting a business on your own. So we don't look at it as a bad thing. Just know that it requires a higher level of scrutiny on my part. Then we need to know when you're going to be performing this. If you're working nights and weekends, no problem. If you're going to be doing it during the day, again, that's I need to see that that's something that you've worked out with your supervisor. So if I don't see that, I may send it back to you and say, hey, how are you going to cover this? How are you going to cover your time? And I'll spend just a few minutes on this last point because I think it's important. We do ask whether or not you're going to be requesting release time. Now, release time is a very specific thing. A lot of people get it confused with annual leave or vacation. For example, there was a gentleman last year who submitted a PAR, and he grows and sells hay that he raises on his family farm. And he indicated that he was going to request release time, but then in the description, he told me, when the hay is ready, I take annual leave and I cut the hay and then get it ready for sale. And if you grew up in rural America, you don't tell the hay when it's time to cut. The hay tells you when it's time to cut. And so you just kind of have a short window there to get that done. And he told me he doesn't actually take release time. He takes annual leave, which is absolutely the right way to do it. So release time, just so you know, is you are asking to be released from some of your 40-hour obligation to the university in a given week. Now, we take that pretty seriously because we assume people are going to be committed 40 hours a week to their jobs. Our current policy says that there are two reasons you can be granted release time: wellness and taking a college class. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't get release time for other reasons, because it is granted for other reasons. But just know that those are the only two that are sort of protected, and your supervisor is expected to give you that release time for that. Now, this is probably a good time for me to tell you that we just got guidance from OGC for people who teach during the daytime, during the normal 40-hour work week. And this came up in reference to the hullabaloo class that they teach to freshmen during the fall semester. A lot of staff people teach that. And OGC's guidance was that an employee cannot use the time that they spend teaching that class as part of their 40-hour commitment to the university. Now, the reason they said that is because you actually do receive compensation for teaching the hullabaloo class. So if you receive compensation teaching the class while you're also being paid to be at Texas A&M, that's double dipping, and the state does not like double dipping. So the best way to take care of that, and I would say the best way to take care of your external obligations, is to either flex it or take annual leave. That's really the cleanest way to do all of that. And so I think that's the end of my slides. I'm happy to answer questions, and I believe that Tracy's group will put up our contact information later in the presentation. But please reach out if you have any questions or concerns.
Thank you, Mark. So to summarize about PARs, we want you to remember that pre-approval means before. So please take care of these forms before you start doing the outside activity. Pre-approval requests can only handle one activity, and if you have multiple outside activities, you will need to submit more than one form. Each fiscal year, these forms need to be renewed. So we start a window of opportunity in about June where you can go into the system and you can submit your pre-approval request for the upcoming year. And then that way it's in place once the school year gets kicked off. So right now, if you have something you want to do for the next fiscal year starting in September, you want to go ahead and get those PARs submitted. The exception to that is if you have an HRGE, a high risk global engagement or international collaboration, and you have submitted a pre-approval request for that. In general terms, that is approved for the lifetime of the activity, and so it does not fall under that same annual review that a par for a different type of outside activity has to follow. And then again, I just want to say this 150504 PARs do take a longer time for the reviews. Mark mentioned that if there's a foreign component to an activity, our offices and the other export control offices are going to do a review. But if it falls under 150504, it has to leave our office and go other places for review. So it does take longer. So you want to make sure you're doing that as early as possible. The final little tidbit that I want to make sure that you understand about pre-approval requests is that you must get it out of the state of pre-submission or it won't start routing. And so you want to make sure that you submit for review. It's not not uncommon that people forget to hit that last button. And so we don't even get the thing yet. And they're worried about why it's taken so long. So please be sure that you submit it. And it wasn't the last thing, sorry. One more thing is that if the activity discontinues, you can take it off of your form. So that is an option available as well. Okay, so the second function that is housed in Huron is the disclosure profile, which Mark mentioned earlier. The disclosure profile is a series of yes or no questions, and it does touch on many of those regulations that I mentioned at the very beginning. Some of the questions are related to specific regulations. Some of the questions are designed to help us do an export control review if needed. And then if you are in a researcher category, you will also have some specific questions related to significant financial interests. So based on your title, the systems work together to put you in a category, and depending on the category that you are assigned to, you will get one of two disclosure profile forms. So if you are in the researcher category, again, you'll have those extra questions, but you will also need to disclose for your covered family members. That's all explained on the form. There's help text. There are additional information resources that you can access that Michaela is going to talk about later to help you understand that. And then if you are not a researcher, you do not have to answer for anybody else but yourself, and you have a limited set of questions. The bullets here for when you need to disclose are applicable to everyone, except for the submission of funding bullet, which only applies to people who are researchers. It is very important to remember that just because you put it on your disclosure profile, that does not equal approval. And so if you are participating in an activity that should have been pre-approved, we will help get that to faculty affairs or HR so they can help you get those forms submitted. These are the common types of disclosures. We ask questions, yes or no, directly related to these things. And so you will just look at the question, decide if it's related to your institutional responsibilities, mark yes or no. And Michaela will go into more details about how you add the additional information that's required if you answer yes. So for your disclosure profile, which is required of everybody, please keep it up to date throughout the year. As the bullets mentioned, if something changes, you have 30 days, you need to go in and you need to make a change and get that on there. If you have DOE funding, they've now changed that to 15 days. So be sure that you are keeping your disclosure profile up to date with that information. The questions are specifically related to the preceding 12 months. So when you log in and you see your disclosure profile, if something has fallen out of that time frame, you can take it off. That helps us actually because then we're not looking through a whole lot of old activities on our current reviews. We can still access the information, but it doesn't need to be on the forward-facing display. Again, we use this form to certify information, and it is not always related to research. So please don't email us and say you don't have any research and you don't think this applies. It applies. If you are a researcher and if you have a positive answer for any of the SFI questions, and you're doing an IRB study, you're doing something that's funded through Maestro, we will do a financial conflicts of interest review during the process. And so that is one of the things that happens, but some of the other questions are reviewed for other reasons. We will follow up if necessary, and we also work with other offices to make sure that information is shared. So, for example, if you have nepotism or you work with minors, we just make sure that the offices that house those rules get the information so that they can work with you to help you be in compliance. And when in doubt, disclose. We're here to help. We're not here to intrude. We just want to make sure that you are operating under all the rules that we have to follow.
Hello, everybody. My name is McKaylee, and I'm going to kind of walk you through some of the basics of navigating Huron. But first, I wanted to talk about this little graphic that we have just to kind of explain the difference between disclosure profiles and pre-approval requests. A little visual sometimes helps remember that. Disclosure profiles are a living document, and the update is required every 365 days. And then again, pre-approval requests are required every fiscal year. Okay, so the first thing I'd like to say is that Huron is not used by every member of the system, so that's why it's not automatically on the SSO menu, but you can add it as a link under your links, which makes it a lot easier when you're trying to access the system anytime you're needing it. So I do recommend adding it to your My Links section on your SSO menu. Once you click on the Huron to log in, you will be asked to select your affiliation. The screen does look a little different each time. Sometimes Texas A&M University Net ID is selected, sometimes it's in the dropdown. But just a reminder that Texas A&M University Net ID is the affiliation that you would want to click, and then that'll get you into the system with your the same SSO credentials that you used to sign in there. So once you're logged in, Huron will bring you to your dashboard. Your screen may look a little different just depending on the role and the access that you have. But one easy way that you can get to your disclosure is from your recently viewed section over here, and you can also pin your disclosure profile for easy access every time as well. Another way that you can get to it is through the COI tab and then the disclosures tab within Huron. And then you can use the filter section right here and search for your first and last name, and your disclosure profile will come up there as well if you're having trouble finding it on the dashboard. So once you're on your workspace, there are a few things that I want to point out here. So first is the status of your disclosure. So no action required means that you've submitted it within the time frame, or you don't have any updates that were tracked but not submitted. And then an action required means that you're either expired or you previously made some changes that still need to be submitted. And then here also you can request pre-approval or edit the disclosure profile. So when you select edit disclosure profile, the first screen is going to be this instructions and policies page. This will look a little different depending on whether you're a researcher or a non-researcher, but it has a lot of information, a lot of the things that we've already gone through, but it has links to our website, links to the frequently asked questions page, and all of the regulations here as well, if you have any questions about that. And then if you click continue, you will get to the entity disclosure information. So these are the questions that Trustee was talking about, where they may be a little different, again, depending on your researcher status, but there's a lot of information here. You'll just go through and answer these questions with yes or no. The help text, if there is help text available, it's whenever you click this question mark here, a little pop-up will appear with additional information about those questions. And so you'll go through all of the questions that you have, and then at the bottom of that section, you'll get to what we call the validation question. So please, please, please double check that the way that you answer this question does correspond with what you answered in the previous question. So if you answered yes to any of the questions, please answer yes here and include the necessary information in the table. If you did not answer any of the questions, you can select no, and you won't be prompted to add anything to the entity disclosure table. Our office does run reports regularly on this question, and if we do see that you have answered yes to any of the preceding questions, but you did not answer no here, we will reach out and we'll need that corrected before we can continue. Okay, so whenever you are adding something to the entity table, you're going to select that add button and this pop-up screen will appear. So the first thing you want to add is the entity or the institution that you're doing something with. And there is a bank within the Huron system that you can search right here to see if the entity already exists. And if it doesn't exist, then you can just use this write-in entity feature here. And I'll show you a little snippet of what that screen looks like a little later. But this is also where you'll want to answer if it's related to you, your spouse, or a dependent child, and also the disclosure type that it corresponds to. And you can select more than one type. So if you do need to do a write-in entity, this is the pop-up box that will appear. You'll have to answer all the required questions, and then you'll be able to save that. So depending on the type disclosure that you select, there will be certain questions prompted for each of those types. So if you select 4 different types, you'll have 4 different boxes to answer those questions for. So please answer these questions with as much information as possible to help us out. And if we need information, we will reach out to you directly for that. But the more information you can put here, the better. Also, I just want to note, like if you're a new employee and this was an activity that falls within the preceding 12 months, but it was at your last institution and it's no longer ongoing, even just putting that in there is super, super helpful for us. So the next section on the disclosure is the TAMO additional information. These questions are based on A&M policies and regulations, and also the exact questions you get depend on your researcher status. So you may have a little less than this, or you may have more questions than this. But you'll answer yes or no, and then select continue, and you will get to the certify and submit page. This page is very important because like Trustee was saying about the PARs, these can also sit in kind of a pre-submission state. And unless you select the certify and submit button, it will just track your changes and you will say an action required. So once you get to this screen, make sure that you select this certify and submit button. And then another pop-up will appear where you'll want to carefully read the certification and then select OK. And then once you do that, your disclosure profile will automatically load and your state will go into no action required. Your last submit date will be the day that you submitted it, and you will be good to go. So next is the pre-approval request function. That button is over here right underneath the state. And once you click that, you'll be asked to name the request and put a title to it and also select the type of request. All of the types do have the same questions except for the high-risk engagement and collaboration that Trustee was talking about a little earlier. It is very important that you select that type if that is the type of activity that you're submitting a PAR for, because the questions that appear are specific to that activity, and it helps with back and forth because those do take a while to process. So the faster we can get it reviewed, the better. So just make sure you select high risk engagement and collaboration for those. So you'll get to the entity information or the activity information section, and it's kind of the same as the disclosure profile. So You'll see if your entity is within the bank, and if not, then you will do the write-in entity feature again. You'll want to make sure you answer all of the questions with as much information as possible, and there's also help text available there on this screen as well. So you'll answer all of the questions, and then you will get to the submit request page. Again, it's very important that you select submit in order to get the routing started on these. So once you do that, you will see another certification page where you can select OK, and this will get it automatically started in the routing. So the first person it's going to be sent to is your direct supervisor, and then our office will help with anybody else that's required to approve it. Once you select OK, you can see the status of it, and there's also a history section where you can see exactly what's the latest activity that took place on that request. You can see that it's been under review and all of the information here, who the assigned reviewer is at the moment, and then yes. And then if this is an activity that is going to be continuing into each fiscal year because it's ongoing, there is a way that you can create a copy of a request, and it'll save exactly the same information from the one that you're copying it from, which includes the dates. So if you do select a copy request, and you're planning on submitting the next request, just make sure that you double check the dates before you submit it. And if anything else were to change, like the people you were working with or the time frame or anything like that, make sure to make those updates as well. But this just makes it easy if it is an ongoing activity that you can submit every fiscal year. And that is all I had for that. Did anybody have any questions or anything? This is our contact page too. But did anybody have any questions?
And so they were asking if they have an affiliation with another university, but they're on leave from that university and not doing work with them, if they need to do a pre-approval. The general answer to that is no. If you're not working with them, you just have that kind of affiliation, the disclosure is fine. A pre-approval is not necessary. I also wanted to just quick correction. My email address on that last page does not have a period between the K and the Drake. So if anybody's trying to reach out.
I do see another question. I think it was directly to me. How does this apply to 9-month employees who do not receive designated leave and are not under contract during the summer? Do activities during the summer not under contract require disclosure? Also, if an employee's consulting work encompasses several activities such as expert witness services, writing and teaching, does each activity require separate pre-approval, or can they all be covered under a single consulting pre-approval? Kelly, do you want to answer that one?
Sure. For 9-month employees, any even stuff that you do over the summer months needs to be disclosed, because while you are not engaging in activity or necessarily receiving pay for those months, you are still considered an employee of Texas A&M University. And then as far as how like the pre-approvals, my answer to that is kind of it depends. It's going to depend on who you're doing the work for. And so if you were doing writing and teaching or consulting services on your own for one specific institution, or you own your own business, then you would be one pre-approval. If you were doing expert witness services for multiple law offices, then we would have those be separate pre-approvals in order to kind of disclose and have that which law offices you're, but so that we know exactly who you're working with, and to avoid any conflict of commitment or conflict of interest later.
Okay, we had another one. Is it true that we can't see Huron in our SSO for this in the pre-approval process? Yes, it is not automatically on your SSO menu, but we have instructions on how to add it as a link that you can always go back to. But it will have to be a manual add.
We've also had some questions about volunteering, and Mark did mention that it is considered an outside activity. Faculty Affairs kind of looks at compensation. So Mark or Kelly, if you would want to address, like, is there a minimum threshold, that kind of thing, for when to submit a PAR?
Yeah, to be honest with you, the vast majority of cars that I process don't make money. There is no compensation. It's volunteer work or it's service work, or it's just something people do for their spouse. And so while the money question, other people may care about the amount of money. For what I do, it doesn't really matter to me. I see it there because it's a question, but it doesn't really affect it. But yeah, any sort of external activity, volunteer work included, we do expect you to submit a PAR for. And again, it's one of those things. It's just better to be safe and submit. Even if you're not sure, go ahead and submit it. We'll let you know if it's not external employment, but yeah, definitely volunteer work counts for that.
And we're happy to help with any questions anytime.